who have just joined us from the United States, and good evening. Happy Friday. Good evening for those of you who are chiming in and joining us from Japan and the rest of Asia, Indo-Pacific. Happy Friday, regardless, to all of you. My name is Yuki Tatsumi. I'm a director of Japan program at Stimson Center in Washington, dual-hatted as a non-resident fellow at Canon Institute for Global Studies. Just giving everyone time to sign on before to get the show started. So if you can give us a couple of minutes, we're going to get underway. Okay. All right, since we only have an hour, why don't I go and get it started? And I'm sure there are people who will be trickling in toward the end as we go. But again, good morning to those of you who are joining us from the United States, and good evening to those of you who are joining us from Indo-Pacific. Regardless, happy Friday to everyone, and thank you for joining us for this joint webinar with Stimson's Japan program and Canon Institute for Global Studies in Tokyo. Stimson's Japan program have been fortunate to partner with the CIGS and for a number of events, both public and both in-person, hybrid, and online. And this is another one of these opportunities. And I am delighted to host two people that I very much respect. They have been a longtime mentor of mine, and I'm very much looking forward to this morning's conversation among us three. Again, my name is Yuki Tatsumi. I'm a co-director of East Asia program and a director of Japan program here at Stimson. But also for me, CIGS is my home away from home, since I do have a non-resident fellow title with them as well. So today, let me quickly introduce both of our panelists. First, I would like to introduce who I call my boss in Tokyo, Mr. Kunihiko Miyake. Many of you know him as Kuni. For those of you, for many of you, he really doesn't require too much of an introduction. He's a long-time foreign policy, national security policy hand, prolific writer, weekly column to Japan Times and the other outlets, both English and Japanese. But before then, he had a long and respected career in the Japanese Foreign Service, and left the Foreign Service after he served as a Deputy Director General at the Middle Eastern Bureau. He's the Arabic specialist by training, but he has been deeply involved in the U.S. Japan alliance related issues as the Director of Japan-U.S. Security Treaty Division, but also in the Asian issues, as he did have a tour in Beijing as Minister of Public Affairs with the Embassy of Japan and PRC. And joining him is Kuni's longtime friend and Stimson's longtime friend and mentor as an institution, Ambassador Link Bloomfield. He's chair of the board emeritus at Stimson, but before then, he also does have a very long and distinguished career in foreign affairs and national security in the United States, serving across several Republican administration, most recently back in the George W. Bush administration as the as the special envoy of the president to the Small Arms Treaty. So welcome to both of you, gentlemen. The way this conversation should go is I would open up the session with a couple of opening questions presented to both panelists, but then after that, we'll go right into the question and answer. So for those of you who are in an audience, chat function has been disabled, so you can only pose your question in a Q&A column, so please do utilize that. And I'm sure opening conversation will generate the healthy amount. I'm already seeing a couple of pre-conversation question comes in. So we'll see. I'll try to get to as many questions as possible. So good morning, Kuni. Good morning, Link. Good evening, Kuni. And good morning, Link. Thank you for joining me this morning. So even though this event is titled around the first summit meeting with the Prime Minister Ishiba and President Trump, I have a sense that with everything else going on since then, our conversation will become much broader. But let's just start sticking to the title of the event, starting from the recent U.S. Japan summit meeting. I think for many of us, this was a surprise success in a very positive way. But let me just start by asking each of your three key takeaways from the summit. So let me start with you, Kuni, and then I'll come back to you, Link, for your additional thoughts.
Oh, Yuki, thank you. Did Ishiba meet Trump recently? I don't remember because it looks like a long time ago. So many things are happening every day, like a kaleidoscope in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere. So just summarize my take on the Ishiba's visit to the United States. Well, number one, Shinzo is gone, but it wasn't too bad. Thanks to whom, I don't know. We, as a team, I mean, I'm not involved, but Japan as a team has done its best not to appear on Trump's radar screen, or threat radar screen, successfully, for reasons. Because poor Canada, Mexico, China, they are the three, countries with whom the United States have the biggest trade deficit. So they are the first three. Then the EU will join them sooner or later. So thankfully, Ishiba-san behaved himself. He did a great job, and he knows exactly how to deal with the Trump administration too this time. But unfortunately, we won't continue to be stealth forever. So sooner or later we will become visible, and the tariffs are coming. But hopefully, the reason why, because of the reasons why I'm going to tell you later, probably Japan could be in a very sort of good position in maximizing the interest of the West and also the interest of Japan itself. That's all.
Thank you, Kuni. Yes, stealth was the right word, I think. and then I do think that one thing that it really struck me was how much time that President Trump spent talking about his good friend, Mr. Abe, when Mr. Ishiba was standing right next to him. So that was one of the things that I kind of walked away with. But with that, let me turn to you, Link.
Well, thank you very much, Yuki, for inviting me, and it's wonderful to be participating in a Stimson program. And neither Kuni or I will admit how long we've been friends, but it means a lot to me to share a podium with him. Our friendship is measured in decades, not years, and it's great to hear his insights, as always. I think my first insight is that Ishiba knew he was walking into a minefield, and the Japan team was trying to find where are the landmines. In addition to the big three trade deficits, you've seen leaders and populations and press corps blow up in Colombia, Panama, Mexico, Canada, Denmark, UK, Germany, South Africa, the Palestinian areas and the Arab street, the Arab media, and Ukraine, of course. And I think that the Japan team did an amazing job, because if you look at the White House readout of the full consultation, it's very normal. All of these things that Trump has criticized, the globalization agenda and whatnot, was preserved. All of the, the Quad and the Japan, U.S., India, Japan, U.S., Australia, Japan, U.S., Philippines, all of it's there with the Trump administration, which tells me that a couple of things. One, the Japan team gets very high marks. And of course, they were prepared economically to come in and talk, put some big numbers on the table, which they did. But the other sort of insight is that Trump wants to have a special friendship with Japan. You could, for whatever reason, I'm not a psychiatrist, but he obviously liked Prime Minister Abe and Mrs. Abe, who was invited to Mar-a-Lago in December. And he wants Japan to be a good news story for him, to say, you see, I know how to manage major relationships. I'm not just blowing everything up. He doesn't want to be criticized by the entire franchise of Japan hands and Asia hands. And so this was sort of destined to be a good news story. And the Japanese people, of course, are so welcoming and hospitable and kind that when he visits Japan, he doesn't face demonstrations in the streets and balloons flying overhead, making fun of him, this kind of thing that he gets in the West. So he likes Japan. I think the third thing is that the normality that you see watching this summit on the 7th of February is very deceptive. And I'll wait to hear what Miyake-san has to say about that. But on both the trade and economic agenda and the security policy agenda, President Trump and his team are tearing up what's considered normal on both fronts, and they're doing it for a reason. They're, I come back to his advisor Steve Bannon, who said some time ago that what you will see when he comes into office is to flood the zone. It's sort of a sports term, flood the zone with outrageous change on so many levels, as Kuni said, a kaleidoscope that you can't keep up. And the purpose of that is that at some point people just give up and say, what are we supposed to do about all this? And that's why all of his appointees, who were highly controversial, they all got in. Kash Patel was just confirmed, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., they're all in, Hegseth. And so I think for Japan, they went back probably feeling pretty good about how well they managed it coming into the first month of this administration. But now they have to think very long and hard. Looking at Japan's security policy, it's not at all clear that the Trump administration this time will want to preserve the norms of international conduct and will want to oppose the disruptive forces in the geopolitical arena. You're muted, Yuki.
You're muted.
No, thank you. I was trying to unmute myself. Great. Thank you for your thought. And then I think, Link, I think where you ended up is the perfect place to pick up my second question to both of you. And Kuni, you mentioned this too. When did this U.S. Japan summit happen? Because since then, there's such a whirlwind of developments and everywhere from Russia, Ukraine conflict. All of a sudden, we're seeing Secretary of State Rubio and his Russian counterpart Lavrov meeting for whatever the reason in Middle East to talk about this issue, and President Trump calling Ukrainian President Zelensky a dictator, and it is really like a shock and awe strategy in all foreign policy front. So it really does feel like, even though if it's only 2 weeks ago, this summit meeting really kind of got quickly into the rearview mirror almost for most of us. But having said that, though, given even with like Middle East, Russia-Ukraine conflict, everything else that's going around the world, what are obviously the challenges are huge, but how can US and Japan can and should coordinate their approaches, or can they even try to coordinate their approaches for this broader global agenda? On this one, let me first turn to you, Link, and then I'll go to Kuni.
So I'm going to give you a very non sort of specific foreign policy answer. I've been thinking about the difference between this administration and the first Trump administration, as well as other presidencies. Recall that when George W. Bush came into office, he was talking about reforming Social Security, but 9/11 happened, and his entire focus shifted to the global war on terrorism. When Obama came in, he wanted to sort of negotiate away the world's problems, but then the economic crisis hit, and suddenly he was in charge of bailing out Wall Street and the auto industry. When Trump came in, the pandemic hit, and this didn't fit with his desire to be the great economic president, and a lot of harm was done. It was difficult. The first administration that Trump had, he had experts around him. All of them were pushed out. Tillerson, Mattis, Mark Esper, John Bolton, Dan Coates. All of these were foreign policy experts. They all came in with the bureaucracy's paperwork and said, "Mr. President, that's the wrong path. We need to do this. You can't do that." And I think he really didn't like that a lot. The new cabinet is not going to do that. He is actually, and so what I'm trying to say is, you need to start looking at the Trump administration not in terms of how is he measuring it on the scoreboard of geopolitics, on the scoreboard of economics, because he's going to say it's a success. He's going to say that the Europeans have not carried their weight. The Europeans have provided more weapons in every category to Ukraine than the Americans. We promised a lot, but the Europeans actually, I've gotten this from a Supreme Allied Commander, weapon by weapon, the Europeans have done more. You don't hear that from Washington. That's not the narrative. The same in the Middle East about Gaza. We're hearing some amazingly different things, and Kuni is a real expert on that. And I go on Arab television a couple of times a week and listen to what they're saying. They're stunned, but they also know that Trump is powerful. So he's sort of taken over a conversation with his narrative. So my summary is, look at the narrative that Mr. Trump is advancing. Look at the narrative. Don't get caught up on the specifics of what the truth might be. Look at the narrative that he's trying to sell. This is why Zelensky opposed him and said, "No, I'm not going to go along with anything that happens behind our back." Don't forget, the Biden administration said nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. We will never negotiate behind your back. Well, Trump has gone right behind his back in Saudi Arabia. And now he's calling him a dictator. And now he's saying that no one supports him. And now he's saying he's corrupt. And so that's the narrative. I think that there is going to be a difference between what the facts say and what they're determined to prove. And this is going to happen on a lot of key issues. But Trump's superpower is communication, and his ability to attract loyalty among his base, and his ability to get Republican legislators not to part company with him. And of course, they're afraid that Elon Musk will pay for their opponents in the next campaign if they do. So the narrative is what you need to play with. I think Japan did a very good job of not departing from the Trump narrative on economics and international security, but how long can they keep that up?
Your thoughts, Kuni? That's an excellent point, by the way.
It's a golden opportunity to be able to talk to Link, who's also a Middle East expert. And my first question, or my colleague's first question, is why they are meeting in Saudi Arabia, as Yuki said. This is my take, and I may be wrong, but my point is this: no matter how chaotic it may look, the Trump foreign policy could be a simple one. If we carefully factualization, is possible. See, the three elements in his foreign policy is his personal ego and the U.S. society, then international politics. Mr. Trump himself, it's a narcissistic whatever disorder. I don't care, but he's anti-elitism, and then he's a pacifist, although he has power, or the United States has power. And also he's interested in making the international order only by big powers. So this is his person. But sometimes it comes up, sometimes it doesn't. And as far as the US society is concerned, with the IT revolution and the widening economic gap in the society, and the forgotten people are angry. And it is not only the phenomena in the United States, it's happening in Europe, and it's also happening in my country, in Japan as well, maybe in other Asian nations as well. Therefore, this kind of trend will continue. That means Trump will continue. Number three, international politics. My assumption is that those 80 years of happy decades between the big wars could be over. See, we are getting back to the World War sort of period in the 1930s, and internationalism is sidelined, and unfortunately, the nationalism and populism are coming back. So my point is this. Real question is, despite the chaotic sort of behavior of the Trump administration, sometimes the Mr. Trump plays the role of good cop, sometimes a bad cop, and others play bad cop and good cop. But put them aside. The real question is Trump 2.0 really exercising any kind of strategy? The strategy I may be wrong, but my point is this. The United States cannot fight 2 or 3 major wars anymore. But the real threat comes not from Russia or Iran, but it comes from China. It could come from China. Therefore, if I were a smart, I'd like to ask Link about this, but if I were a smart strategist in the United States, well, I would try to make a deal with the Russians and ask them to be silent for a while and let the Europeans do the job in Europe, and let the Israelis and Saudis and maybe Emirates to work on Iran, while the United States has to focus on the Indo-Pacific region. Am I wrong?
Okay, Link, I think there you go. I'll go back to you briefly before I go to my last question.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think that pick a sport. If you're playing baseball and 6 of the players on your field put their gloves on the ground and close their eyes, it doesn't matter how good the others are. In other words, I think our credibility, what Hans Morgenthau called the reputation for power in a good sense, comes from being strategically wise at every table where we appear. We haven't done that reliably over recent years and on both parties. But the reason that NATO, the reason that our 5 treaty alliances in Asia, the reason that the Middle East peace process that has convened so many times without finally solving the problem, but with great progress, the reason that those things work in the past is that Americans have taken their responsibility seriously to show up with ideas, to say, we've thought through this process. I mean, Henry Kissinger was controversial, but you can't deny that he had a strategic view of how things were connected. That's not happening right now, and I think that if I understand that President Trump has big ideas about the international arena, you've alluded to them. Europe hasn't done enough; they should do more. Ukraine is not worthy of our sacrifice, etc. But what that does in the Pacific, I believe, could be devastating. Because if you can sort of get away with backing away from Ukraine, and whatever happens, happens, okay, maybe the corridor to Kaliningrad gets established militarily, maybe part of Moldova gets taken away. Maybe the refugees that fled the war in 2022 never get to come home and either bury their husbands or reunite. Maybe none of that ever happens. Maybe the children who were abducted from Eastern Ukraine never come back. And so what does that say about Taiwan? Not to mention Hong Kong, not to mention the South China Sea. And so, and the whole territorial issue, which was resolved in 2016 against China. But I fault both the Trump and Biden administrations for not banging the gong repeatedly about that on the 9-dash line. So I think it all matters. I think you have to be credible and coherent. I come back to the fact that we are just 1 month into this administration. Today's headlines in Washington talk about new polling numbers, and I won't get into that. But the point is that at some point, let me take a football. I don't know how many people follow American football, but you can go in and move the goalposts. You can re-chalk the lines. You can abuse the referees and accuse them of being, you could go into the locker room and scare people from coming out to fight against your team. But at the end of the day, there is a scoreboard, and the score is it. When it's over, one team won and the other team lost. I don't think President Trump, at the end of the day, can avoid the scoreboard of what really happened for European security, what really happened in the Middle East, which we can talk about in a minute. There's a lot to say there. Or what happened economically with jobs, with the price of eggs, the price of gas, the price of rent, the price of home insurance with climate disasters in Florida and California. These are things he can't avoid, and time will tell. And we have an election in 2 years. So at the end of the day, you have to pay the piper for your performance in power.
We hope so.
You sound like the some of the social media posts after the Bills Chiefs game at the AFC Championship game, Link.
I'm just an abused Patriots fan.
I feel your pain. I'm so sorry about this last couple of seasons. Anyway, enough about American football. Thanks to you both. And as Link alluded to, as where he ended up, this is another perfect segue into my own last round of questions to you both. So obviously, like Link mentioned, President Trump will face midterm election in 2 years. And then even before then, first month into it, we are flooded with all kinds of domestic politics related news here in Washington. And then also Prime Minister Ishiba in Japan is not all that better off either. He needs to govern with the what the rare situation, which is majority majority government or minority ruling coalition, having to constantly reach out to the opposition party to get anything done. So from that vantage point, that both leaders will eventually have to, face the scoreboard. And I think Mr. Ishiba's scoreboard facing time comes a little earlier this summer. How do officials in both governments who try to kind of carry the torch throughout this turbulent times can work together to maintain the relationship and actually making sure that remind their bosses to keep their eyes on the ball I'm going to borrow a phrase from Mr. Ishiba and actually in a funny way Mr. Kishida too, his predecessor, to elevate the U.S. Japan alliance to a new height. So I will go to Cody first and come to Link and additional thoughts, and feel free to have an interaction between you both. So Kuni.
Right. To elevate the security alliance with the United States, we've been trying to do that every year and every minute. But and we are making some progress. And look, just until a few years ago, we couldn't dream of spending 2% of GDP That was an unreachable dream at the time. But now things are happening now, and unfortunately, what I'm advocating these days is 2% may not be enough. Not because Mr. Trump says 5% or 3%. Whoever says 3% doesn't. I don't care. We need to be able to deter whatever attempt to change the status quo by force in our neighborhood. And in order to do that, we should be able to continue fighting if necessary, if deterrence fails. And look what happened to Ukraine. How many years they've been fighting? 3 years. So how could we expect that the contingency in our neighborhood only lasts for 3 days? It's not going to happen. So that means, regardless of what the Prime Minister or the President of the United States says, we have to spend more. And that really, is a big, big, big issue, of course, because it relates to money and budget. But unfortunately, that's the only way we can elevate our relationship with the United States.
Link, your take?
Well, I'm going to be a little more optimistic. If I were having one of my private breakfasts or lunches with Kuni before he goes and advises his leadership, I would say the following. Remember what we've talked about with President Trump. He's trying to establish himself as the change maker, the dynamic person who saw through the international order and the social order, the political order, disrupted it all because he knew what was wrong with it. They weren't spending enough, et cetera. But I don't know that defense spending, that may be the most practical answer. But I think that playing into the narrative, Japan can take the relationship to a higher level, not by becoming sort of a partisan advocate in American politics, but by saying, look, we see what you're doing. And, naturally people get uncomfortable when the international order is disrupted, but it also opens the door to possibilities. We understand what you're doing. We see what you mean. And in Asia, there's no denying the rise of China's power, but you've also seen their economy kind of flatten out. You've seen the tech sector sideline. Now he's pulling them back in. There's some ups and downs. And as my mentor, Rich Armitage, always used to say, we wouldn't want to trade places with the leadership of China. They have a lot of problems too. And, and so I think there needs to be a new conversation. It's not just about preserving all of the quadrilateral and trilateral and bilateral fora. It's about, what do we talk about? What do we conclude? Can we come up with a strategy that defines China's place as a much bigger and emerged and modern power that's building so much defense? What's the solution to that? Not what's the defense against it, but what's the solution to it? And I think this is a fertile opportunity, if the wavelength can be established with President Trump, to have that conversation. And I would hope that somewhere in that, on the Japan side, Kuni is helping to write the talking points.
Well, the problem is that Mr. Trump always like strong leaders. And so the question is Mr. Ishiba strong enough? And the test will come this summer. The two elections, one in the Tokyo Municipality Assembly, and the other one is the upper house. So that will be the two tests which would approve or disapprove his political power. So that's the problem. Mr. Abe got along well with Mr. Trump, not because he plays golf. It was simply because Shinzo was strong. And that's what Mr. Trump loved.
Well, thank you both. This has been fascinating, but I think I do like to open this up, start the Q&A with the general audience.
Let's do that.
Okay, I have to give the first question to our President Emeritus, Ellen. Good morning, Ellen. Ellen, this is Kuni. This is a question from her.
Oh.
Great to see you all. I wonder if Kuni could address how Japan sees the aftermath of the Gaza and Hezbollah wars, and if Japan would want to play a role in the reconstruction of Gaza.
Right. When I was director in the first Middle East division, I was a frequent visitor to Gaza because we used to have an office there. So we have a long tradition of helping Palestinians. So I think our position will not change. But the question is the two-state solution still alive? Probably not. Well, nobody wants to stop talking about it, but nobody can be sure that it will survive. So I think that's the biggest question, and I don't think that Gaza will be a Riviera or whatever resort in the Mediterranean, unfortunately. So we will continue to be involved if we have a chance, as we did in the 1990s.
Thank you. So Link, you are a long-time Middle Eastern affairs observer as well. So what was your take when you first heard about this Riviera and another Trump resort in Gaza idea? Because obviously, Washington just basically got set on fire because of that, virtually speaking. So
Yeah, I mean, I had a chilled feeling, I'll be honest with you. The name Jared Kushner came to mind immediately. And if for those who are insiders to Middle East, my joke would be that we will be sitting having a cocktail looking over the Mediterranean in a bar called Protocols. But anyway, Kuni got it. The point being, this is occupied territory under international law. Israel signed up to Resolution 242. Presidents have exchanged top secret assurances with leaders in the Middle East since then, including some who descend from the Prophet. And to say that that doesn't exist and that we'll take it over, first of all, there's a contradiction. I mean, as Kuni pointed out, President Trump, in some ways, is a pacifist. He doesn't really interest himself in military matters. He tried to withdraw from 5 different major regions the first time around. Mattis wouldn't let him withdraw from Syria easily. The Afghan withdrawal was pulled back before Inauguration Day by General Milley, as you may have heard. It would have been finished before Biden even took the oath. Goodness knows what that would have been like. He wanted to withdraw from Korea. We've now learned from the memoirs of Mark Esper. And he wanted to take 4,500 troops out of Germany. And he withdrew from Somalia. So, I mean, this is who he is. And he's always talked about avoiding forever wars. So I don't know what to make of this. I think this is coming from Prime Minister Netanyahu. And I don't think our president understands the situation of Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has extended this crisis, who has chosen to respond to the attack of October 7th in a way that I don't believe the U.S. military could ever have done. We would never have been allowed to follow those rules of engagement. It would have stopped much sooner. There would have been an attempt to bring in Arab-speaking forces, maybe from Jordan and Egypt under a UN mandate, with the U.S. carrier right offshore and air overhead, with Israel monitoring in real time, with UN agencies distributing aid and medicine. And so none of that happened. The death toll was very high. On the peace process, let me just make a terrible analogy. Israel would never, even if they found out that all the remaining hostages were dead, God forbid, they would still want them back. And so I'm sorry to say this way, but even if the peace process is dead, it still needs to be brought back, even if it's a 20-year process. Now, the one person who can skip over that is the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. If he says, well, I think I'll just normalize with Israel and I won't make it a condition that we have a path to Palestinian self-governance, that would be a risk. I mean, we always see what happened to the Arab Street. You saw what happened in 2011. 2 heads of state fell. Syria led to a civil war to prevent a third from falling right away. He's now fallen. So I think Mohammed bin Salman will insist on some kind of a process. It doesn't mean it'll work right away, but that's the condition. And frankly, if from Israel's standpoint, and I'm not an Israeli, but I did chair the Joint Political Military Group for 4 years and oversaw all arms transfers. And I believe Israel's strategic interest is very much waiting to walk through the door. Once they normalize with Saudi Arabia, Iran can't threaten the Gulf with nuclear weapons because Israel's part of the club now. The Gulf is now in the warm bosom of Israel. That changes the equation dramatically. Iran's power goes down overnight. One more Iran comment, if I may be permitted, which is right after the October 7 attack, I was starting to write. It took me months to finally find the right message in the moment because everything changed. When I had lunch with Kunihiko Miyake, the first thing out of his mouth was that Hamas did this because of the pending normalization of Israel and Iran. And I've had some of Israel and Saudi Arabia. I've had pushback from friends in Saudi Arabia that actually the planning took much longer. But remember what the U.S. government said, the Biden administration. And I don't fault them for this, but they said Iran was surprised by the attack. And it became part of the national threat assessment of February 2024. We assessed that Iran was surprised by the attack. You had Abdullahian, who died in the helicopter crash, saying, oh, if the Sixth Fleet is going to show up, we may not be able to remain a bystander. I was outraged by that because I knew that Iran was fully informed. I mean, there were meetings in the days leading up to it with the supreme leader in Beirut and others, two different sets of meetings. And so we've never talked about Iran's role in the October 7 attack. And it's been obscured by all of the carnage in Gaza. So the Palestinian issue has become the only way the press talks about this. And that's a big strategic regret. We should be talking about everything Iran did to set the Middle East on fire and upset the whole trend of normalization, which would have isolated Iran.
Yeah, I'm just the two fingers. The reason why they're going to meet in Saudi Arabia means a lot, and I don't know what they're going to talk about, but definitely they started talking about the Middle Eastern issues, and that really changed the balance of power in the Middle East as well. So I'm partly scared, partly optimistic, but I'm not sure what we'll see in the next few months. Sorry.
No, this is fascinating. So this may be the good segue into the next question, which is again, first one was pointed at Kuni. So next one, I'll pick up the one that's specifically for you, Link. So you mentioned in the outset that President Trump's policy, kind of alliance policy, almost like a minefield, right? So how does that work? How does it work for the United States in the long term if suppose you have a president who kind of makes allies feel like they have to navigate the minefield to have a positive relationship with their administration when they're out, when this demonstration, when the demonstrations are outreach to countries like, China or like a Russia seem to be kind of run the opposite strand.
My answer to that is that it's really, I'm going to give a very simplistic answer. It's personal to our president. It's his comfort level. He did not enjoy having highly qualified delegations coming in and laying things on the table, or when he visited abroad, where they were clearly trying to angle for concessions from America and whatnot. And these were difficult issues. I mean, 3 times he went to Asia to meet with Kim Jong-un, who now has more nuclear weapons than ever. None of it added up to anything. And that was emblematic of President Trump's early experience, where a lot of showmanship and where's the results? And I think, the pandemic put an exclamation point on that. And so what the minefield does for him is it makes everyone else tiptoe around him. It's pretty simple. It's sort of, now you need to wait and see what I have to say, because my word is going to be the one that decides what happens here. It's the same thing that's happening domestically. People don't know. I mean, judges don't know whether they can pass rulings. Congress doesn't know whether they can appropriate funds or not appropriate them, because Elon Musk is cutting $75 billion that has already been appropriated. And so we have a constitutional question mark at home, and I think we have a foreign policy question mark abroad. But the point of it, though, is psychological, to establish that President Trump is the thought leader of the world, and that if you want to get something done, you could say navigate a minefield, but you have to determine what's on his mind and then cater to that.
Great thought. So if that is the case, right? So what does that mean as to governments, at least at the official level, try to maintain the much cooperation and collaboration as possible between U.S., not just U.S. and Japan and Indo-Pacific, but try to preserve, some of those unilaterals and multilaterals like Quad. I don't know which I should turn to you first, but maybe I turn this last one was Link, so maybe Kuni.
Well, the Quad you're talking about? Trump is not interested in multilaterals, period. I'm afraid. So they are not sending their cabinet members to G20 financial or foreign ministerial. So they are not interested in. So they are like America between the World War I and World War II. They talk about the League of Nations, but they didn't join. See, so and this time they established the United Nations, but it's not working, and Trump is departing. Literally, what we have been working on for the past 80 years. So I'm afraid it's not. Thank God, it's not our government; it's Americans' government. But we need to be very, very smart, very, very skillful in synchronizing the interest of Japan, the interest of the United States, and personal interest of the President of the United States. It never happened before.
So on that note, we all talked about one of the great attribute to the kind of a U.S. Japan summit having gone well this time around was the lot of preparation that went in on the Japan side. But then also, how much of that do you think can be attributed to the fact that before Mr. Ishiba met Trump for the first time, he actually walked in with the accomplishment that Japan has already achieved even before he came into the office? Like you mentioned, Prime Minister Abe's a lot of national security related reforms, institutional and legislative, or three national security document that was released under Prime Minister Kishida. That kind of plays up, emphasizes Japan's effort to fundamentally enhance its defense capacity and so forth. I think that might be a Kuni question, but then feel free to jump in, Link.
Well, what was the question? Could you repeat the question?
Yeah. So basically, my question is, what do you think a part of the reason why this first Ishiba Trump meeting went well was because Prime Minister Ishiba walked in with the accomplishment by his predecessors. But then, if that is the case, how much more he can do to actually, I guess,
Well,
other than
he has to win.
winning the election, what
He
more
has
can
to win the elections, and he has to consolidate his power, so that what he should implement, what he had told Trump
Mm,
a few weeks ago. And if you cannot deliver it, and we'll be in trouble. So it all depends on the outcome of the election.
mm,
And anything happens, anything goes in my country now. And they are now talking about Kome, LDP, and Ishin coalition. Okay, they may pass the budget bill, etc. I don't know what's happening. This is becoming more and more chaotic, and I'm not sure this kind of the political shows would help uh, voters to to trust the LDP parliamentarians again easily. The people wants to punish them because of the past what they have done for the past 30 years, not only a year or two. So I think the entire conservative movement will be tested this summer.
mm, mm. That's an interesting thought. So this one, Link, do you have additional thought to that?
My only thought is that I look at what the president Trump is doing in some other countries' election process. He's interfering with land reform in South Africa. He is criticizing Chancellor Scholz going into the Sunday elections in Germany, saying that Germany hasn't paid for. We've supported them their entire defense, which is not true. Host nation support is very strong. And some of this is coming from perhaps Elon Musk's own politics, which are very far right, apparently. This is not happening in Japan, fortunately. I've thought, just one thought. I have thought after the election of Mr. Trump that, my friends in the think tank community, including these two institutions, Stimson and Canon Institute, my friends in government who are professional foreign policy and security experts, and even serious reporters around the world are really on their back foot now because President Trump is unpredictable. He's not. You can't look at sort of the lay of the land, the facts, the trends, and predict what will happen. It gives you no real indication. And I thought, is this going to be a 4-year interregnum where the professional class has nothing to contribute? I've changed my mind. I think that actually this is a very dynamic time. I don't think President Trump can control the action perpetually on all fronts. And I actually think there's more of an opportunity now for experts in and out of government and also for the private sector to just go and do the things they need to do and move towards strategic goals that matter, and hope that the United States sees it and wants to take credit for it, or keep relations open, but do what you have to do, and because this is a very dynamic pivot point in history. We're not going back on a lot of issues. I think Kuni would agree with me. We're writing the next chapter right now, so everyone really needs to roll up their sleeves and help write it.
Thank you. It's very important, and that's the question I really wanted to ask you this time. Regardless of how chaotic Mr. Trump could be, or his other players are playing different games, but is there any minimum level of consensus among the like-minded foreign policy and national security hands in the United States, hopefully including you, to do the right thing, regardless of the president, number one, and number two? Well, of course, Europe is important, the Middle East is important, but still they have to focus on China. Is there any minimum level of consensus about that, or we don't have it?
Well, I'm not sure that I'm qualified to answer that. I know I'm not, but I think you could say that with those who have been appointed to high positions, perhaps with some exceptions, there's a strong view that that China poses the threat the U.S. needs to focus on more than others. But there's also, and I've talked to some Republican legislators who said that we'll never abandon Ukraine. So we know that Secretary of State Rubio, National Security Advisor Waltz have a view that, and certainly General Kellogg, who was the envoy for Ukraine, these are not people who would quickly walk away from American honor in Ukraine. And so I think we have to just simply watch the trend. It's like watching a hurricane. When will it calm down? There may come a time, and this is my bottom line, where Japan's sort of normality, Japan's financial responsibility, its quest for normal trade relations, its understanding of the architecture of stability in Northeast Asia and the Pacific generally, where those things become a plus to the Trump administration. And they turn to, and then Rubio and others sort of say, you see, we've stood firm in Asia. We have great alliances. You know, they will be boasting about the things that you're worried about now. This could become an asset to them.
Mhm. I agree.
So on that note, I knew exactly how this is going to go, that between two of you, you are going to carry the conversation amongst yourselves, and then with my minimal
That's all right.
intervention. And then
This
long
is
and
Jake
behold,
Christian.
there's only 4 more minutes left. So I do have 10 more questions to go through, but rather than doing so, let me, and then I apologize to everyone who took time to write in their questions. One final question to you, to you both each. So for Link, if that is the trend line, that we're kind of on the see where the trend line goes, and do what you need to do. What does that mean, do you think, for the U.S. allies across the globe, but then for the purpose of this seminar, specifically for those allies and partners that U.S. has in the Indo-Pacific? They're all kind of in a tight place between looking at U.S., looking at China, how those, the relationship with those strategic competition is going to fall. So how do you think U.S., at least officials who are mindful of the impact of the U.S. decisions and behaviors and actions,
I will.
should be dealing with it? And then that's a question to you. And then for Kuni, if that is the case, that Japan will enter a phase where it really needs to do what it needs to do, what does that mean for Japan? There are a couple of questions about what does that mean for Japan. Does that amongst the audience, about does it mean that Japan will look for ways to be more independent in terms of foreign policy? How does Japan balance its relationship with China? So I guess that I'll first go to that. That will be my last question to Kuni. So first I'll go to you, Link, and then I'll give Kuni the last word.
No, those are important questions. I'll try to be very brief. The leaders of America's friends need to cultivate good relations with the President of the United States. And whether it looks good or bad to the local population, that's the way they will get things done. They need to pay attention. They need to go along with it. And the professional class throughout these governments and throughout their think tanks and their civil society, it's going to be a very rough ride, because what the Americans will be hearing, what you'll hear from the Americans, are people who work under President Trump will repeat his policy, and they'll make it sound like this is the right thing to do and that this is strategically appropriate, when they may feel that no, it's not the right thing to do. This is uncertain. This is ill-advised. They may think that, but they just have to. We're going to have to go through a period where what will change this is politics in the United States. Right now, there's no opposition voice that can compete with President Trump at all on his level, with his kind of summary ability to point to things and say, this is wrong, this is right, we like this, we don't like that. No one has a voice on, but there's a lot of unrest and opposition. So I think we just have to ride it out. But my advice is get your leaders to do exactly what Ishiba did so well: connect on the right level, make it a success, make him look and feel good, ride the goodwill, and the policy is going to have to be sorted out later.
All right, last words goes to you, Kunihiko.
Yes. What I've been advocating these days to my audience is that, Japan is not growing anymore. It's shrinking. The population is shrinking, and we have to survive. And in order to survive, we have to have to survive as an important player in the international society. Then we have to maintain, uphold the legitimacy. And that is, of course, we are a true believer in the universal values. And also we are opposed to the change of status quo by force. But at the same time, we have to have strength to deter whatever attempt to change the status quo. So it's not a choice between the United States and Japan. I mean, the United States and China. See, we will survive, and we must survive. In order for survival, we have a lot of things to do, including the establishment of for example, real robust external intelligence service organization, for example. So we have a lot of things to do, but it's not a choice between the United States and China. We will survive. That's what I've been advocating for the past few months.
With that, I'm not quite sure if I should call it cautiously optimistic or cautiously pessimistic, but on that cautionary note, I would like to thank both of you, Kuni and Link, for fascinating conversation. As I gathered, as I anticipated, the conversation has quickly become much wider than just bilateral U.S. Japan, and I do think that that actually speaks to the nature of the bilateral relationship that we are at today. We're no longer talking about specific announcements that came out of the summit meeting or whether that can be implemented, but then we are at the level where we really do, even if we're talking about bilateral issues, the conversation does broaden quickly into much more broader global issues. So I think that is really your conversation really symbolizes where the bilateral relations are today. So I wanted to thank you both. And thank you for the audience who chimed in on the Friday morning or Friday evening. And I really, really apologize that I could not really get to the question, but I learned a long time ago that when these two gentlemen starts talking, it is more fascinating to let them speak their mind off and feed off of each other's thoughts. So that's exactly what I tried to do. And then I hope you enjoyed the results of my effort of letting them talk freely and think freely and leveraging off of each other's thoughts. So with that, again, thank you both for joining on Friday. Happy Friday to everyone for the rest of your day, wherever you may be. And this concludes this seminar. Thank you very much.